Hey, my name's Austin, and I am so glad that you're joining us today for Lifepointe Online. If there's anything that we've learned over the last several weeks, it's how big of a challenge can bring about in our lives. I mean, challenges change the way we think, the way we react, what we worry about, and even where we look for hope. For better or worse, challenges change us. And there are a few things that challenge changes as much as our priorities. Think about the things that are high on your priority list now, or the things that have recently fallen to the bottom. Until recently, conservation of toilet paper was not high on your priority list, but it is today. In the past, getting out of the house early so that you could beat the traffic on your way to work was high on many people's list, but probably not this week. And for many families in America, what we've discovered is reconnection with relationship and conversation has taken an utmost priority in our lives that it would not have had before the crisis we find ourselves in. Challenges have a way of showing us what's truly important because they point out the finite nature of our lives and resources. In the midst of adversity, there is rarely enough time, energy, or money for everything. And so, oftentimes, it forces us to elevate what matters most at the expense of things that matter less. But here's what I want you to understand. God never wastes a challenge. In temporary moments of struggle, God creates the clarity necessary to prioritize what matters most, even beyond the crisis. Martin Luther King penned some of his most powerful writings from a Birmingham jail. President Roosevelt discovered that the only thing America needed to fear was fear itself. And during the bombings from Nazi Germany were the very same moments that Winston Churchill rose to his greatest moments of leadership. Challenges are inherently difficult, but challenges lead us to priority. And no one knew this as well as three friends we find in the first half of the Bible: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men were Jewish captives in a place called Babylon, and because of their wisdom, they were forced to serve at the service of the king. And while they were highly regarded by the king, things changed quickly when he built an idol in the middle of town and required the nation to bow down and worship it. Here's what we find. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "Nations and people of every language, this is what you're commanded to do. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, pipe, and other kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold King Nebuchadnezzar has set up." This shift caused a great deal of change. For a season, these men's devotion to God and their service to the king happily coexisted. But with the creation of this new decree, things began to change. Here's what we need to remember. Change creates challenge. Change isn't always bad, and it's not always good, but when change occurs, challenge is bound to surface. Who would have thought a year ago that the prospect of working from home in your pajamas, mere feet from your refrigerator, would have presented you with somewhat of a challenge? But that change now comes with the challenge of managing 3 kids, a barking dog, the Amazon delivery guy, and business meetings on Zoom all at the same time. See, change creates challenge. It's not, however, change or even the challenge that leaves us better or worse in the end. It's what we do in the midst of that change that sets us up for failure or success. It did certainly for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Not only had the king ordered everyone to bow down and worship this man-made idol, but they found that the penalty for refusing to do so was to be thrown into a fiery furnace. You guessed it, death, and not the kind you or I would hope for. The 3 friends were able to resist anonymously in the background for a while, but sooner or later, their refusal to worship became public knowledge. And at this point, they found themselves at odds with the king. And in anger, he gave them an ultimatum no one wants to receive. Here's what he said. "Now, when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you're ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you refuse to worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand. Here's the second thing we learn. Challenge creates choice. It's not challenge that defines us. It's what we choose to do in response of the challenges in front of us that highlights our greatest values and determines who we will be when the challenge subsides. Choices have a way of setting us on a path towards who we will become. So what choice did these men make? Here's how they responded. We find it in Daniel chapter 3, verse 17 and 18. They say this to the king: if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold that you have set up. Here's what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego teach us. Choices reveals priority. What we choose in adversity reveals the priorities of our hearts. And whether we realize it or not, we stake our lives on our priorities. It is our priorities that set us in motion. They establish the trajectory of our lives and ultimately determine its destination as well. Nothing is more important than the priorities we choose, and nothing helps shape them like a good old-fashioned challenge. So what happened to these three friends? In a rage, the king threw them into a fire so hot that it burned the men alive responsible for throwing them in. And yet when they landed at the bottom, what the king and his audience saw was that none of them were injured. Not one hair on their head was even scorched. And in amazement, the king ordered that they be brought out of the furnace. And this response changed the king's priorities as well. Here's what we find. Then King Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted him and defied the king's commands, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way." Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego set their priority and faith in God no matter the outcome. It changed not only their future, but the future of an entire nation. And here's what you need to know today. Where you place your priority will not only impact your future, but the future of your family, your friends, those who you know and love, and even the future of people you have yet to meet. Today, we are all in the midst of a challenge, and where we place our priority will determine who we become when the challenge is over. So let me ask you, where have you placed your priority? And number two, is it worth staking your life, your future, and the lives and the future of those around you? Maybe today you're ready to make a shift and bring your priority back to Jesus. And if that's you, we have been praying for you this week, and our team wants to pray with you today. If you'll just click the live chat button on the top of your screen, we have men and women ready to meet you and pray with you about that decision. God is more than ready to welcome you home. There will be an end to this challenge, but what we do in the midst of it will determine who we become. Remember, change leads to challenge, and challenge leads to priority.